Surprise! Surprise! It's Saturday. It's the middle of the day on a Saturday.
We're keeping everybody guessing.
Not as drunk as you might think we would be in the middle of the day on a football Saturday. It's the Libertarian Moms here, Parenting Porcupines. We've got a surprise broadcast here in the middle of the day for you. Hopefully some folks are able to tune in. If not, and you're watching the replay, we're just glad to have you with us. We are the Libertarian Moms. And today we're talking about boys will be boys and how this is a dangerous adage to adopt in your household and what it has to do with the non-aggression principle. We're going to get this going. You guys know I don't watch the replays very often, but I do have this sense that like it's entirely likely we admit to drinking way too much on this program. But I do want to say that this is a good excuse for a day drinking episode because it is the middle of the day right now. It's 1:43 on a Saturday afternoon. My beloved Gamecocks are playing Tennessee. We always say that with like a little, here's my Clemson mug in front of me, right? But of course, you guys know that I'm a split personality as far as our South Carolina teams are concerned. But Melissa went out and did some charitable work this morning, cleaning up the highway, Adopt a Highway. And Jessica had a tough week all week. So it's time, man. Pour yourself a cocktail and let's get talking about what's relevant to parenting porcupines. Today's episode is Boys Will Be Boys. And I asked you guys in pre-show if you've ever had an experience where something happened and somebody excused it with boys will be boys. And I think the most recent time I heard that was Holly was a little kid and some little boy pushed her on the playground or something. And when I said to her mom, his mom, you know, hey, that's not okay, right? Like he should apologize. She said, well, boys will be boys. And I thought, you are the problem. But the first time it ever happened to me, I was in high school, and this kid that he and I were no longer dating, he broke up with me. Let's put that out there first, right? But continued to harass me and bully me long after we had broken up. I guess because the girl that he really wanted didn't want him because of how he had treated me, which is, again, on him. But he and his buddies emptied a bag of trash on my parents' front lawn. And when we knew that's who had done it, when my dad called his family to confront them, his mother responded with boys will be boys. When I said this to the two of you, you both said, I think all three of us at the same time, my kid would have been over there cleaning that mess up, right? It would make your head spin how fast my kid would be on your front porch apologizing and cleaning up. So where does this phrase come from, Jess? What does it mean, boys will be boys, and where does it come from?
I mean, I don't know exactly where it comes from. It's been around for a long time. I mean, as long as I can remember. I remember hearing it when I was a kid. You know, boys will be boys or girls will be girls. And I think that people use it when the children are displaying typical gender type behavior. But I think over time, as people have lost that sense of personal responsibility and accountability, like what we've talked about in prior episodes, I think that it's become more of an excuse. I think it's become more of something that people use to excuse behavior in kids that they don't want to address. Maybe they're uncomfortable. They don't know how. Maybe they just don't want to upset their kids because they want to be their friends. That happens too. So it's kind of morphed into this excuse for behavior that is, you know, extreme, it's predatory, it's aggressive, it is any number of things that are negative, that have negative consequences for not only for the child, but for the people around them, really, right?
Yeah, in a harmless capacity, Melissa, what kinds of boys will be boys behaviors do you think are harmless?
Mine's loud, and he likes to wrestle. Yeah, the wrestling, I don't understand it. But my husband assures me it's normal. Kids that boys do that. Okay. I don't see it. But yeah, playing in mud.
Farting. Like that's the first thing that comes to mind. Like I struggle with that with my boys. I'm like, you guys, you have to, like, if you are at the table and you need to pass gas, please excuse yourself. Like, but boys will be boys. They think farting is funny. You know, that is a boys will be boys.
I mean,
right?
farting is funny. That's
farting is funny.
It's like
farting is kind of funny.
We might be taught as girls and women to be a little bit more proper and behaved and couth about these things. But
well,
there's
it's
just
still
something not funny about flatulence. Like it's just, it's right there, right? So like as the mom, you feel like I've got to be the one that that taps down on this, right?
My 8-year-old daughter could give a 300-pound man a run for his money, and it's hysterical.
Yeah.
But not in public. Don't do it in public.
Yeah.
That's what we need to teach. The difference between sitting at home and being in a
Private
restaurant.
behaviors and public behaviors.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's critical, right? It's not necessarily
Yeah.
boy behaviors and girl behaviors. It's private behaviors and public
Yes.
behaviors. We need a whole episode on that. Okay. So if we start with using boys will be boys to excuse benign behavior, right? Things that are not that big a deal, right? Like something like that, like public flatulence or whatever, right? And you go, well, it's just boys. They just think it's hilarious and they're just, being whatever. It's dismissive. Number one, it's dismissive. And it tells the boy that their behavior doesn't really matter. It lumps that kid into a group of sort of, we don't expect any better of you, I think is probably why I really dislike this phrase, because it basically, and even the girls will be girls phrase, if they're being catty, if they're being mean, if they don't want to mess up their hair or their nail polish, anytime we dismiss their behavior with this kind of gender moniker, to me, it's just dismissive. It makes it seem like that they're not individuals and they're not to be held accountable or personally responsible for that behavior.
Yeah, they don't have control over their own. Well, I guess I'm a girl, so I act like this.
Yeah. Which to me is, again, it brings it down to like the base common denominator, and it gets them off the hook for having to take responsibility for themselves. So the first time we did the boys will be boys, we talked about consent, because we talked a lot about whether or not people are willing to be touched, whether they're willing to be hugged, whether you can approach somebody in this way. We had this whole conversation last night, as a matter of fact. We were talking about it with a person who used to teach HR and is now in the career management office at the university with us, at the business school. And we were talking about what the boundaries for professional touching are and are not. Like, can you get away with hugging a colleague when you haven't seen them in a while, right? Or with putting your arm around somebody, or what are the boundaries for that anymore? And like how that's constantly being redefined. And some of what we talked about we were expecting with this episode is we would bring up this concept of this Me Too and sexual harassment. And like, where does that line come down? Like, how do you know the difference? And how do you act in a way that demonstrates that you know the difference and that shows respect for other people? And then ultimately, how do you teach your kids to behave with respect for other people? So that's kind of the general outline that we're headed down. Oh, I forgot to say, the show notes are out on the blog, parentingforclines.com. You can follow along right there. So what do you think? Let's go first, Jessica. Where are we as far as this discussion is concerned? Do you think is there a written codified way that we're supposed to interact with each other, or is it a case-by-case basis?
I mean, I think it's common sense, right? Like in a professional environment, I don't think it's appropriate to touch anyone in that way, unless you have a relationship established that that person is comfortable. And I think that there are certain ways that I think that person is comfortable. I mean, I have had friends in my professional life, and I still do, who I hug when I see them, because we both know that that's okay. They've never asked me not to. I've never asked them not to. And I don't know that anybody's ever asked me. I don't know. I just don't feel like, I think I would know. Like, I wouldn't just walk up to a coworker and be like, oh, hey, like, here's a hug, or my boss or his boss. So I think in the workplace, and then I think in friendships, I think it's probably a little bit different, because there's more of a comfort level there. Like, for instance, during COVID, this is probably the best example I have because it's the most recent. But right as COVID was things were starting to open back up, our church started to open back up, and we went to a service. And one of the friends that we have at church, who I'm not a hugger. Admittedly, I'm really not a hugger. I just don't like human contact. But I always hug her. We always hug when we see each other. But she asked me, "Can I hug you?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And I probably would not have hugged her without asking her. So I think if in doubt, you ask, can I hug you? Can I shake your hand? If the person if it's awkward, like ask.
Yeah.
But definitely don't touch someone if you know there's not that consent. It's kind of a gray area. It's hard. It is hard, and it's a hard thing to teach your kids. So I think really the answer is, if in doubt, no touch, right?
I think you're right on the ask. And I think the other piece of that is having the courage to say no, right?
Yeah.
And COVID gave us the perfect excuse to say no, right? Because you could be like,
Yeah.
I'm really just not comfortable with being that close to somebody else with germs. I've had this cold, like whatever else. You can like use COVID as a convenient excuse to like put that social distance there. But before that, right? Like if somebody were to hug you or to go in for the hug, it was kind of like, maybe I'm expected to accept this because it's a sign of affection. And if I were to refuse this sign of affection, then I'm creating some kind of barrier between us, or I'm trying, does that make any sense? Like there were certainly times in my professional life before COVID where somebody went to hug me because they felt like we had a very close relationship. I did not feel that close to that person. And I will also say this, I've never been inappropriately groped with that hug, right? Like it was always like the very professional two-pat hug, right? Like, so if somebody was, there's never been anybody that I didn't know well actually, quite frankly, never been anybody that just groped me anyway, right? So I'm fortunate in that way, right? I never felt like I was being assaulted by these people, but certainly there was a time where like, even if it's just like hot and sticky out and you're like, God, I just know I stink. Like, please don't hug me because I'm pretty sure I smell, right? You know what I mean? Like those kinds of things where to be able to be like, oh, please don't. I felt like always created some tension there that you might not have wanted to be there. What do you think, Melissa, in terms of this boys will be boys? Because I know we kind of like wandered off that and we've started talking a little bit more about consent, like physical touch here, but like, when you talk to your kids about, because you said your son likes to wrestle, at what point do your girls say like, I've had enough, I don't want to do this, like I don't want to be, or his friends that are like, I don't want to do this? How do you help him navigate that to help him see the warning signs when like his physical aggression, and not like in a mean way, but like in a playful way, that his physical aggression has like reached a place where he needs to see that he needs to back off? How do you navigate that conversation?
Usually someone starts crying first.
Oh no. And then mom's like, stop.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Because
it's a very nuanced, isn't it?
Because it is. It's very hard to explain, like, because you can hear the difference when your sisters are going, oh no, don't tickle me, and when they're really pissed, and you actually have to stop. And I'm trying to teach all of them, when you say no, stop, or someone says that to you, you stop. I don't care if they're joking around. You don't say that joking around. Right. Only say stop if you're serious. Because I'm going to yell at the other one for not stopping. Oh, well, we were just playing. That's not playing.
Right.
No means no.
Right.
It doesn't mean no doesn't mean yes because I'm playing around. No.
Right.
It's always no. Stop is always stop. So,
yeah. And that doesn't require nuance, right? Like that is
no is a complete no is a complete sentence.
Yeah, this is the rule. So Jess, in our show notes that you put up on our blog, I'm going to go ahead and show that up here again real quick. We started this conversation around the experience at Stanford, and what's his name? Brock Turner. I hate to even say his name out loud.
I know, me too.
So talk a little bit about that and like how because we were outraged. I think that's the reason we ended up putting it on the thing, is because we thought there are two different sides of this conversation. The first side of the conversation is, at what point do women recognize that they are in danger, that they have put themselves in conditions that are untenable, right? Like I'm not safe here, right? And then at what point or can a woman she can't trust the person she's with, right? And the other side of that conversation is like, at no point in time ever should any man see a woman who is helpless and think that that is an invitation for sexual intercourse, right? Like ever, ever, right? And so there was that outrage that you and I shared last summer when we were first like talking about the show and all that, and the whole thing came out, and we were like, yes, oh my God, but this. So talk a little bit about that.
So Brock Turner in 2015, January of 2015, I think at Stanford, I think he was leaving a party. There was a party, and I want to say there was some alcohol involved, but this young lady he sexually assaulted, he raped her. She was unconscious. she couldn't consent. She couldn't decline. She was unconscious. And thankfully there were 2 other students who happened upon the scene, and they, kept him there and called authorities, and they came and arrested him. And there was a trial, and this whole thing, there was so much controversy surrounding it because of how it played out. And I think there was some legislation after the fact. There are some links in the show notes about it, and you can read, there's tons of information, obviously, because it was a big, very public, messy thing that played out. But he ended up being sentenced to only 6 months in jail, 3 months of probation, and he had to register on the sex offenders registry. 6 months in jail. He served 3 because he was an athlete and he was a good boy. And boys will be boys.
Well, he just made a bad choice, right?
She was unconscious. Yeah. And so I think, the conversation around that specific example is when our kids, whether they're boys or girls, when they see those situations play out publicly, mm-hmm. and they see someone get a slap on the wrist for that, that tells them, oh, well, if you're a good athlete or a good student, or you just don't get in trouble, you can do this horrific thing that completely changes someone else's whole life, shatters their whole world, and you're going to get away with it with basically a slap on the wrist. I mean, he's got a criminal record down. He's on the registry. But do I think that the punishment he received fit the crime? Absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely not.
Well, and I think it tells him it's not that big a deal.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Melissa. I think it undermines what a big deal it is, right?
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
It makes it seem like that, clearly.
It's like speeding,
Well, and as a woman, and for our girls, I mean, I don't have girls, but I say our girls because we are a village, right? And for our girls to see that, it's like, why am I going to go through that? Why am I going to I'm sorry, I get really hot about this. Why am I going to put myself through a trial, being questioned, being publicly harassed and said horrible things about, if that's all that's going to happen to him? Why?
Yeah, for 3 months in jail, it's not worth the pain. Yep.
Yeah.
And he's going to be, or she was slut shamed during the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Why was she unconscious? Why did she drink so much? Right?
Well, no, yes, because she made some bad choices, but
what was she wearing?
Made some bad choices, but but those bad choices do not mean she deserves that
in any way. Not in any way.
Yeah. No.
But as a side note, major kudos to the 2 students who saw it happening and stepped in and said, hey, you're going to stop and you're going to sit your ass right there until the cops get here because you're screwed, dude. This is not okay.
For looking out for her, right?
Yeah.
And for wanting to be the good citizens there.
Do the right thing.
And do the right thing. Yeah. Agreed. And so to kind of like just back away from like the horror of all of that, not just because there's not a whole lot we can do about that particular scenario. How do you prevent that kind of thing from happening again? And this is why we titled the episode "Boys Will Be Boys" doesn't give you a right to be a rapist, right? Like there's a line at a point where you are affecting somebody else's life and you are violating somebody else's autonomy and somebody else's safety and security. That's the place I think this "boys will be boys" phrase ends, when whatever it is you're doing is hurting or harming somebody else, is negatively impacting somebody else. And this isn't like, okay, we all had to smell your fart. That's not the thing. It's like, this is pushed down on the playground bullying, right? This is sexual assault in college experiences, right? And we all know somebody that had that experience. We all know somebody in her 20s who was with somebody who was more aggressive than he had a right to be, right? And at various levels, right? And I think that there's a sense that she has a right to security and a right to safety just as much as he has a right to be who he is, right? And so once he violates her security, it's over. He's now the criminal, period.
Yep.
I'm like you, I get fired up about it too. I didn't mean to.
I do.
Because it's Saturday afternoon. And I mentioned like, that's cool. Like, let's talk more about the farting at the kitchen table.
Well, and I
That's
think too, like, I want to go just a little bit further in that and say that it's not just, and this is the conversation that we have with our kids. It's not just that what you are doing is definitively impacting. It's that what you are doing could potentially impact someone else, because you're responsible for not only your actions, but all the consequences of your actions. And so telling them that, if it's hurting someone, it's wrong. Well, yeah, I think that goes without saying. But if you're doing something that could potentially hurt someone, it's equally as wrong, because just because you don't get caught or just because there's not an immediate negative consequence doesn't mean it's right. Right?
So
you can get away with things. So,
let's get an example of that, though. So, because we're off the sexual assault conversation, right? Now we're talking about boys will be boys behaviors that might be something like vandalism.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Or driving recklessly.
Speeding.
Doing donuts in a parking lot, where kids regularly ride their bikes or something like that, it's, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agreed with that. And so when we think too, we're not, hello, little one.
It's not bedtime.
Yeah, right. but Mom.
We're all confused.
I don't know why you're online right now. It's not
she wanted more time on the Switch. More video game time.
Yeah. That might be what my kid is doing right now, actually, is video games. Although I did have her washing the Jeep earlier, so she's done her little chore for the day. And later we're going to torture her by making her go with us on a family date. It's like us and our friends and their kids, and like we just keep pushing them together, and they're all super awkward, and we think it's really funny, so we just keep making it happen.
Well, at some point that'll stop, right? They'll get used to each other and be fine.
One would think. They've been around each other since they were like 5, right? When they were really little, they connected really easily, but now that they're teenagers, it's like everybody is super awkward. So we just think it's funny.
Yeah, love it.
We pay for the bowling, right? So that they can, well, anyway, blah, blah, blah. All right. So we're not okay with pushing this away with the boys will be boys. We also think it's behavior that could potentially impact somebody else. And these are conversations that have to be had, one time, puberty? Or is it, yeah.
I think it's constant. I mean,
my kids don't remember something one time.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's anytime, obviously anytime they do something that warrants discussing it. But also, because when things like this pop up in the news, and they do. In the show notes, there's reference to Brett Kavanaugh, and I know that's a very heated conversation. But when he was going through his, confirmation hearings to be a Supreme Court justice, it came out that he may or may not have sexually assaulted a young lady in college. And, there was a lot of boys will be boys excusing of that behavior. And, whether he did it or not, none of us know because we weren't there. But whether or not
our kids heard people excuse it.
That's what our kids are hearing. Yeah. And so having those conversations to counteract that and making sure that they understand that even though that's what these people are using to justify that behavior, it's not okay. And this is why it's not okay. Because you're impacting the life of someone else. You're doing something that has a direct impact on someone else, or that could have a direct impact on someone else.
Well, but go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to say, because you can't just say, this is always the rule in every situation, like with the coworker stuff, it's very fluid what's appropriate or not. You have to show them examples time after time. Hey, this over here was okay. This was not, and why? So they can develop that inner guidance and know, oh, this is okay and this isn't.
Yeah, and they need
lots of examples.
Constant examples, yeah, because that's really how they do start to figure out how do you, it's like Pandora, right? You thumbs up a song, you thumbs down a song. The more they get this kind of internal algorithm of this is like a scenario I saw one time, and that scenario was not okay, so this scenario is also not okay, right? I think you're right about that it's like a constant reminder. I also think, though, that we hear other phrases that are similar to this, and just as damaging. And we heard them when Trump ran for office, and we got the grab them by the pussy conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that when we hear the phrase locker room talk, this is not okay, right? And there were a lot of men who came out and said, that's not a thing. Like locker room talk is not a thing. And if you're in a locker room where people are talking like that, you're in a toxic environment and you should have known better, right? So that was really interesting to me too, is we have heard the boys will be boys. I've never heard a man excuse sexual assault. I will say that for the men in my circle. I've never heard them try to excuse sexual assault. But I will also say that a lot of them stepped forward with that locker room talk conversation and were like, hell no, absolutely not. You don't talk about women in that particular way. And I thought that was actually encouraging, but it still goes on. We do still hear it. Any other phrases besides the locker room talk that come to your mind? I don't know.
I can't think of any off the cuff.
Like, I don't know, pop quiz. My brain doesn't work.
I haven't had enough vodka yet. It's not late enough at night yet, right? Yeah, I don't know. I think more than anything, probably the point we're trying to make with this conversation is to, number one, dismiss those phrases or to stop using those phrases. Let's just get rid of them altogether, because they do underestimate the impact of other people's behavior. And then two, I think, is that personal responsibility thing, Jessica, that you alluded to, which is when our children make choices, and they are choices, behavior is a choice, right? So when they make choices, they have to be held responsible and accountable for those choices. And when they see people that are not being held accountable for those choices, then it limits what they think the seriousness of the crime really is, right?
Yeah.
What a sad topic for today's episode.
We go from angry to sad.
Well, I just want to figure out, like, how do you fix that kind of thing? I mean, we're living in a patriarchy society, right? Like, we're living in a society where men believe that they have a right to be bigger.
I mean, it starts at home. And I think that's why, as parents, we need to have these conversations openly, because I think that it takes all of us, raising the next generation to do better, to be better. And I think that if we're all on the same page, or at least most of us are on the same page, and we act as a village, then it makes it a little bit easier to raise that next generation to be better, right? That seems kind of kumbaya, campfire, but it's true.
Well, the culture is
true.
the people.
Yeah. And we all need to,
people saying the same thing, and it'll change the culture.
Yeah.
And valuing other people doesn't diminish your position at all, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's not like you have to give up your place so that somebody else can have a place, right? There's plenty of room for everybody to live in a respectful environment, to feel secure, to feel cherished, to feel listened to. There's not any reason that giving somebody else that room or not trying to edge them out of that room would diminish your own role in it. I think that's the other piece of it, is like, sometimes this behavior comes from a position of like wanting to assert authority or assert power, specifically power. We know that sexual assault is primarily about power. It's not even really about sex, it's about power. So when we think about that, like, how do we help our children understand that power is not it's not something to be desired? Does that make any sense? Like, I don't know how else to explain that, but like, how do you help people to say we can share the community together? And this is that kumbaya thing, right? We can live in harmony. We can live in peace together. We can compromise. We can cooperate. And none of these things requires that one of us assert our authority over somebody else. Is that right?
I think that's a really deep conversation, because I think then we start getting into the conversation about holding each other responsible, right? And creating that system where others are accountable for their actions. Because as parents, if my kid is hanging out with kids who are not making good choices and are being disruptive, dismissive, destructive, any of those things, right? Then I'm probably going to first go to the mom or the dad and explain that, you know, these are the behaviors I'm seeing. Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned. And if they don't, you know, if they're not working with their kid, then I'm going to want my kid to be around them. Like, I'm not going to let my child hang out with influences that, that are not going to be constructive for them. Because there's a line that has to be drawn. I have expectations for my kids. I have expectations that they're going to do the right thing. Not only that they're going to do the right thing, but that they're going to hold their friends accountable. But if their friends, and I think that's important because you have that peer accountability, right? You have peers holding one another
Peer
accountable.
pressure can be a good thing.
Right. But it can also be a really toxic thing, right? And so no matter how good your kid is, they can still be negatively influenced. And so, you know, maybe if enough of those kids didn't, you know, maybe they had enough of that accountability from their peers. You know?
But isn't this too part of that, this is that parent mentality as well, right? Like, we had this exact problem at the club this summer where there was a group of kids that was being dropped off or left at the pool all day, every day, right? They're all teenagers, you know, they can't drive anywhere, right? So they're like little kids, teens, they're like 12, 13, 14 years old, right? And they were misbehaving, they were being destructive, they were littering, they were tearing up furniture, right? Like they were being disrespectful to the lifeguards, like this kind of thing. And the parents that we were hanging out with, we knew this was their kids. Like, we knew it. We knew exactly who these kids were. And as we're talking about it in our circle, we knew it wasn't our kid because she doesn't go to the pool. She probably really was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to the pool at all. But I mean, so we knew it wasn't our kid. But like, they sent this email. The club chairman sent the email to like everybody. Hey, there's basically this gang of kids that's misbehaving. If these are your kids, call them down, right? And the next like time that we were all together at the pool, it was like, oh, I don't know who those kids are. My kids would never do that. I'm like, they're exactly your kids. They're exactly your kids, right? Like, how blind can you be? You think that there were 15 kids here, your kids were 2 of them, and they're the only 2 that weren't behaving that way? Really? No, they were doing it too, right? Like, you have to assume that your kid's being bad too. You have like, and I would say like, it's probably really hard to think of that, like that my kid would be the one that was bullying somebody else, that my kid was tearing something up, right? It would be really hard to admit that your kid is doing something like that, but you got to be strong enough to admit it and do something about it instead of being like, oh, well, it wasn't my kid. My kid would never do that. It was everybody else's kid. At one point, they were all blaming the one kid who's not really a member, like his grandparents are members, but he's not, his family isn't. And he just didn't belong there. He shouldn't have been there. He's the one that's been starting all the trouble. There are 15 children in this. He's not the only one doing it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it was awful. But it was interesting to watch these adults say, like, it wasn't my kid. It wasn't mine. What do you do about that? I mean, the other thing is, I don't understand why we all got the email. Again, because we knew exactly who it was. Everybody at the club knew who it was. So why didn't it go directly to those kids' parents? Instead, it was like,
and I think, you know, if
come out, that's rude.
If I were
that's the whole point.
Got to be yeah. Well, no, I know. Yes, but we are direct to the point people. Not everybody is.
True.
I think if organizations like that too had more of a no tolerance policy for things like that.
You don't come back tomorrow.
If you're like, you get one warning, and that's it. If your kids come back tomorrow and act a damn fool at this pool, we are turning off your key. Your key will no longer work. You know, your fob, your card, whatever it is, will no longer open that gate to the pool.
Yeah.
And you forfeit your money that you paid, but you will not have pool access any longer because, you know, and I mean, as a parent, though, it concerns me how many parents take that immediate position of, oh, well, it can't possibly be my child, because it can be your child. It probably was your child. And even if it wasn't your child, you still need to be talking to them about what's going on and why it's not right.
It's their friends and they're with them.
Yes, because even if you're not participating, if you're part of that group, then you are going to be seen as part of the problem, period. It's like my dad always told me, if you lay with dogs, you're going to get fleas.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. I love that Southern
Yep,
adage.
you're
It's
judged
great.
by the company you keep.
Yeah, well, and
Yes.
that's the thing is I don't expect you to stand up to your friends and keep them from behaving that way, but I don't expect you to be part of it either, right?
Disassociate
So
yourself
you
from
need
that.
you need to call
Yeah.
and say, Mom, you got to come pick me up. I can't be part of this. Like
Yeah.
there's bad things happening here and I don't want to be involved with it. I don't want to witness it. I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
There needs to be a place where when you feel uncomfortable enough about what's happening, that you do something about it. And even if that something is just removing yourself from it. And that's probably a really hard lesson to teach your kids too, because they want to be included in the group and they want to be part of the group and they don't want to be seen as the person that's maybe tattletaling or something. But the other side of that too is Charlie and I talked about they're lifeguards, right? These are 16, 17-year-old lifeguards who didn't seem to have any authority at the pool, or at least didn't feel like they had any authority at the pool. And we thought, my God, when we were lifeguards, we had all the power at the
Kick
pool.
them out. Yeah.
Like
Make
we
them
had
leave.
it all. We kicked them.
You're the
out.
lifeguard. Yeah.
Yeah, get out, get off my deck. You know what I mean?
It
Like
was a different time. It was a
Yeah.
totally different time because at that
Yep.
point in time, parents would have backed you up.
Mhm.
But I mean, nowadays, if a 16 or 17-year-old tells your kid to leave the pool, I mean, not your kid or your
Right.
kid, because we all are on the same level here. But, you know, a lot of moms, they'll go to that 16 or 17-year-old and they will chew them up one
Get 'em
side and down the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, because how dare you? You are a child. How dare you treat my child that way? And so that's, you know, it goes back to that example that we're setting in these situations by allowing that behavior, by excusing that behavior. It's not just boys will be boys. It's not just girls will be boys. It's kids will be kids, right? Yes, kids will be kids. Kids will be rambunctious. They're going to make bad choices. They're going to get into trouble. They're going to, you know, they're going to do all these things, but we cannot use these adages to excuse away behaviors all the time. We have to teach our kids to do the right thing. We have to teach our kids to be accountable for their actions and to hold their peers accountable, period.
Yeah.
Agreed.
We're trying to turn these kids into adults. So you don't want them to be kids.
Yes, raising them up.
At some point, they need to be adults.
Yeah.
Well, they're going to be adults regardless. But if they were
And they can't act like kids when they're
good human beings, that would be even better.
Yeah.
Raise good people. And I just we'll close on one little thing too. I had every class when my students leave for the weekend, I tell them to make good choices. And I finally had one of my students say, how do you know exactly what my mom says to me? And I said, probably because I'm a mom too. I said, make good choices, take responsibility.
Well, because that's all you can do.
Yeah.
It's just make the best choice you can.
I want them all to come back safely on Monday, go out for the weekend, enjoy yourselves, but make good choices. All right. And that'll do it for, I think, this show for today. Now it's time. I think halftime's over. Time for me to go back and watch the rest of my football.
Your beloved?
Yes, my beloved. And Navy plays this afternoon too. So it's a big bye week for Clemson, but a lot of really good football on nonetheless. It's good to see you both.
Y'all too.
I love you so much. In person sometime soon.
Soon. Very
Bye,
soon. Bye.